On a cold Saturday morning in August 1980, 8-year-old Jason Granville woke at his usual time of 7:30 and noticed something was very wrong. His mum, Marion Granville, wasn't in the house. Jason and his 2 younger sisters, Christina and Joanna, were home alone. No one knew where she'd gone, and there was no explanation why she had left her Nainai home. Marion Granville simply disappeared and never came home again.
She was a very good mother, adored her children. She lived for them. She would never have left them unless their life was threatened.
The fact that she had gone missing and the fact that the children were still in the household, that triggered some alarms for us.
Over the last 3 decades, many rumours have circulated, but Marion has never been found. What happened? And how could a suburban mother of 3 vanish without a trace?
For my own sake and for the sake of the children, I just wish that somebody could come up and say, well, I know a little bit more about this. Perhaps this is what happened.
Somebody knows. Whether she's alive or not, somebody has to know, because people don't disappear into thin air.
Marion was outgoing, definitely. She liked company, she liked sport, and she liked to be in with the crowd.
Just a joy to be around. She was very, very vivacious, very funny, very cheeky, loved a good joke.
Marion Granville was a 29-year-old aspiring model and housewife, described by all as a devoted mother.
I always remember, and I don't know how old she was, but I think she was still in primary school. And she said, you know, Mum, all I want is to get married and have children. We've always teased her about that. But that she was quite serious. She said that was her career. She was a very, very good mother. Very capable.
The night before Marion Granville disappeared, she was at home with her children watching television. A neighbour, Kay, called in at about 8. She later told police Marion seemed tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. Jason also thought everything seemed fine.
He was very observant, and children often are, of course, more so than you give them credit for. When you said they watched television and his mum was and Auntie Kay were laughing about something, and he was watching too. And then he went to bed about 9 o'clock.
But Jason's little sister Christina saw their mum much later that night, and her demeanour had dramatically changed.
Christina said she woke up in the middle of the night and wanted to see her mummy. She said that the light was on and Mummy was in bed and she was crying because she'd hurt her arm. Of course, the girls were 4 years old, you know. So she said, and then Mummy took me back into bed.
The next morning, Marion was gone. Jason called the mother of Marion's de facto husband, Michael Sneller, who lived close by.
She said, look, dress the girls, lock the door, and then you come to me. So I guess they would have arrived there possibly as early as 7:45 or 7:50, and Marion was seen shortly after that in her car at the dairy.
Sometime between 7:30 and 7:45 a.m, Marion Granville drove her grey Falcon to a dairy in Seddon Street, barely 400 metres from her home. This is the last time anyone would see Marion again.
She was very casually dressed, so I believe. You know, she had slippers on. She wouldn't just walk out. I can't believe she would do that. So it was strange, and it worried me.
Marion disappeared on Saturday morning, August the 30th, 1980. Police launched a full investigation 1 week later on Saturday, September the 6th, and a local dairy owner came forward to say he'd seen Marion on the day she disappeared. Police focused their attention on this last sighting, and reports emerged that she'd been talking to 3 men.
Well, she parked in her grey Falcon behind a white car similar to that car you can see parked there now. And then a few minutes later, she was escorted from her car and was driven away.
Have you got any idea why Marion Granville made that rendezvous?
No, that's the mystery. That's what we're exploring.
But 30 years on, it is still not known who Marion met at the dairy or why. Her bank accounts remain untouched, and she's not been in contact with her children. Despite several witnesses, the 3 men and their car have never been identified. The grey Falcon Marion left at the dairy mysteriously made its way home, reappearing in her driveway later that Saturday afternoon. No one knows who drove it there. Marion's case remains a mystery.
Well, no police officer involved in a case likes matters to be left unresolved. It'll never be closed as such.
Detective Inspector Norm Cook was one of the early investigators into Marion Granville's disappearance. Although the investigation was officially dropped after 6 weeks, Norm has never been able to let the case go.
There is always that hope that eventually we'll be able to find her.
Marion's children were separated and raised by different grandparents. They all now live overseas. They'd like to know what happened to their mum. And Vera desperately clings to the hope that one day she'll find out what happened to her daughter.
If you lose a child as a parent, I think that's pretty bad, because children are not supposed to die before their parents. But when you lose a child and then you don't even know what happened to that child, that's even 10 times worse. And that's what's been my and the children's burden to carry, really. Until we know what has happened, there's no closure.
In August of 1980, 29-year-old Marion Granville, mother of 3 young children, simply disappeared outside a dairy near her Nainai home. She was last seen talking to 3 men.
If she had thought she was in any danger, she was a very, very good driver. She had a very powerful car. And all she had to do, she was sitting in the driving seat, all she had to do was to put her foot down to get away. Or yelled her head off, but none of those things happened, so it's strange. Very strange, yeah.
Thank you for coming in, John.
Yeah, no problem.
The dairy owner and several other witnesses saw Marion parked over the road from the dairy that morning.
It's about 7:30, 7:45 a.m.
One local resident took particular notice.
And what streets were they on?
It was Seddon Street and Waddington Drive.
And that's when you noticed the vehicle?
Yes, there was 2 vehicles. One was parked in front of the other.
Did you notice anything about the other car?
There was a white or cream Holden.
And the other was Marion's car?
Yes, that's correct.
Was there any loud noises or yelling?
No, I couldn't hear what was being said. There was no raised voices. Just saw the police were arresting them.
After 6 weeks, police had exhausted all lines of inquiry and the investigation stalled. They believed Marion had been abducted, but couldn't rule out the other possibilities of voluntary disappearance, accident, or suicide. Now, nearly 30 years on, we've asked Australia's leading criminal profiler, Wayne Petherick, to look into Marion's case.
Criminal profiler is a person who's typically trained in the behavioural sciences, including possibly the forensic sciences as well. With Marion, there's obviously a distinct lack of physical evidence that you would rely on. So what we're left with is more of the victimology. And what you're doing in a victimology is trying to get a general idea of where the danger is coming from in their life.
Discovering what kind of person Marion was, what was going on in her life, as well as information about her past, could provide important clues. We've given Wayne police and coroner's files, bank statements and other records, as well as interviews with Marion's mother and friends. As in the initial investigation, Wayne starts with the last sighting of Marion, focusing on her personality.
Personality traits are absolutely pivotal in figuring out your victimology. What we're talking about really is how she's going to respond to being grabbed up off the street. If she's a person who is known to be a fighter, to resist, then her going peacefully might tell you something about her relationship with the people she's with or her particular understanding of the situation.
Sandy knew Marion well. They were best friends for many years.
We met when we were 14. There was talk of a new girl coming into our class, and her name was Granville, and she'd come from Mana College, and I'd better look out because she was a good swimmer. But we hit it off, and we were firm friends from the first time, really, I suppose, that we met, which was in our togs, standing at the swimming pool ready to dive into the water. She was fun-loving, she was very vivacious. We loved going out together, especially when we were like teenagers. She was very loyal to her friends and usually took a lot to get Marion fired up.
Not long after Marion and Sandy became friends, Marion's father passed away and she became increasingly independent.
She was about 13 or 14 when he was taken ill. He had cancer and she thought she'd take control of her own life. But by refusing to do school cert, she wouldn't sit school cert. Instead, she enrolled herself in Polytech and got a secretarial course. She would never have been able to leave home so soon if her father had still been alive. We kept in constant contact. It's not that she just turned her back on us, not by any means. But I just wasn't, I was in the position to stop her.
As a 17-year-old, Marion went flatting with Sandy.
I got her a job where I was working. We just had a lot of fun together. We used to go out dancing a lot. We were underage, but that never ever stopped us. We hitchhiked from one end of New Zealand to the other. I was always scared about getting into cars because we were only 16 and 17. But when I was with Marion, I was never ever afraid, and if there were cars that stopped and she didn't like the look of them, we didn't get in. She was a very good friend to me. And on occasions, we would go to parties and she would smoke dope. And I didn't like it, and I told her so. And we had a bit of a, well, not a bit of a, we had quite a big blow up about it, which affected our friendship.
At 18, Marion competed in a Wellington modelling contest and had a series of portrait shots taken in the hope of securing photographic or catwalk work as a model. By the age of 20, Marion was on the move to Auckland. She had an older sister there and also a boyfriend.
And of course, the inevitable happened that she got pregnant to him, and he didn't want to know anymore once he She was pregnant, that was it. That was Jason. She did get a place up there in Auckland, but I think she was quite lonely.
Vera helped Marion move back to Wellington, to number 10 Wilkie Crescent, Nainai. Despite the tough time she'd been through, Sandy says Marion seemed happy.
She appeared on my door with this beautiful little baby boy, and she looked like the Marion of old. She had that sparkle in her eye, and she just looked great. And our friendship picked up again from there.
A few years after Marion's move back to Wilkie Crescent, she started a relationship with Michael Sneller, a man considered to be a local bad boy. No one is sure how they met, but his mother did live just around the corner.
I was surprised at Marion's choice of partner because I had known Marion's previous boyfriends, and he was totally different to the guys that Marion had gone out with previously.
Attractive, dashing, wild, wild, and it was a type she'd never met before, you know, that really bowled her over.
Mike really prized Marion because she was lovely. Someone to be seen out on your arm, good looking, tall, lovely, lovely hair. You look twice at her. So I think he would have been very, very possessive.
Marion and Mike had twin daughters in 1976. Neighbour Kay had children about the same age. Mike was often absent, and the two mums spent lots of time together.
I never looked at him as a partner because, to me, when we did things together, it was because she was by herself. I've always known her as a solo mum, and I've never ever included him in her life, even though he was there. Very independent.
Money was tight, and Marion got by on the DPB.
She was a good budgeter. She never spent on rubbish, you know, like how we would go out and buy chocolate or something like that, or for the children. She never did anything like that.
She was a good manager. That's what helped her to get by, because she knew how to cook and she knew how to make the best of things and, you know, save a bit of money.
She was organised. She never had washing all over the place. It was always hung out every day, always brought in the same day. The kids were never running around with nothing on. They were always dressed up every time. Just like a normal mum. You bath the kids every night, give them a tea, and that's what she done. She was a good mum.
While Marion was providing love and stability for her children, neighbours knew there were problems between Marion and Mike.
When it came to Mike's side, it was a totally different thing. I didn't see a loving relationship. To me, it was just something she got into and couldn't pull out of it. We worried about her a lot, but she never ever showed that she really needed that help, other than coming out with glasses on, which we thought would have been black eyes underneath.
There was no doubt about it, she did change. I didn't see quite as much of her when he was around. She wasn't quite as forthcoming in telling me what she'd been doing. Just a little bit more reserved. Of course, I mean, he did have a reputation, confirmed by several people that we knew.
From what she had told me, he was an important man, someone who was going places, which I thought was funny because she never really seemed to have that much money. My husband and I both offered her money to, you know, help her out, but she said no, she could always get it off someone up the coast, and I think she referred to him as a godfather.
sometimes I said, what happened to so-and-so? And he said, oh, the godfather has that, and until we can pay it back and get it back again.
It scared me because I just didn't know what sort of people that she was mixing with, or more importantly, who her partner was mixing with.
The behavioural science of victimology was not available to police at the time of Marion Granville's disappearance. Unlocking Marion's personality will enable our behavioural expert and criminal profiler, Wayne Petherick, to assess where the likely dangers would come from in Marion's life.
Personality characteristics like loyalty and independence might actually expose vulnerabilities, I guess. And she's very independent financially, or at least she tries to be. And what this means is that at times of financial difficulty, she might be more open to suggestions.
Wayne has been reviewing all the files on the Granville case, and with a better understanding of Marion's personality, he can anticipate her reactions in any given situation. The study of victimology is divided into two specific areas. The first is lifestyle exposure, the day-to-day dangers in Marion's life.
In terms of lifestyle exposure to harm, I would suggest that Marion was a high risk. She drank alcohol regularly at a local watering hole where there were known criminal elements, and she was a single mother who was perhaps open to exposure of financial incentives.
At the time Marion Granville disappeared, family and friends had little idea how complicated her life had become. But it wasn't long before the reality hit the headlines.
Well, she's been involved with the drug scene. She's on a charge, and this disappearance of hers is connected with drug activities.
I was just stunned and shocked, because I know how worried she was about the kids. And if you're that worried about your children, losing your children or anything happening to them, why would you do that?
Marion was dragged along because of her husband's want-to-be, if you like, part of that scene. She was incredibly loyal to Michael. And I think the centre of her life was her children, there's no doubt about that. And so long as the environment she was in catered for the needs of the children, she was able to cope. She was strong enough to cope. But it wasn't a lifestyle of her choice, I'm quite sure.
The Wilkie Crescent home Marion shared with Michael Sneller had been raided several times. The last time, police discovered a substantial amount of marijuana. Marion had been jointly charged, along with her husband, with possession of cannabis for supply. Mike was taken into custody. Marion was on bail and due in court just 2 days after she disappeared.
She was so frightened that social welfare would step in and take her children.
Sandy last spoke to Marion the night before she disappeared.
We'd been on the phone for at least an hour. We talked about the court case that was happening on Monday. She was really worried about the questions that they were going to ask her. Got a bit upset there for a while, but Marion was a very strong person, and I thought she'll be okay.
But Marion never did make her appearance in court. And with Mike on remand for drug charges when Marion disappeared, the children were separated and sent to live with different grandparents. Wayne believes it's unlikely that Marion would leave her children. As part of his victimology assessment, he also looks at incident exposure. In this case, the last known sighting outside the dairy. This is the way the main witness to Marion's abduction walked back to his home. And this is the view from his home to where the cars were parked. It's not very far, giving weight to what he saw.
Many of the eyewitnesses actually suggest or infer that the scene looked like Marion was perhaps being arrested If witnesses are under the impression that the person's being arrested, they pay perhaps less attention, meaning that they can provide less detail when later on questioned about the event. And it has been said previously that was the way the Mr. Asia crime syndicate operated, in that they wanted people to think that a particular person was being taken away by law enforcement.
There are many aspects of this last sighting Wayne has found significant, including the duration of the meeting. Marion talked to the man through her car window for about 20 minutes.
There does seem to be a level of comfort that she either knew them personally or perhaps knew of them by association. It's possible that they were discussing transactions. What else is significant is that there didn't appear to be any raised voices or any aggravation between the parties involved.
Wayne believes the meeting was pre-arranged.
From Marion's perspective, it would be a relatively safe location to meet. From the people who took her's possible perspective, if they were looking to get her to lower her guard, this would seem to be a very safe location.
The witnesses gave good descriptions of two of the men, but none thought to write down the number plate of the car they were driving. And despite extensive inquiries, police reached a dead end.
Marion's situation in the weeks or months leading up to her disappearance actually appeared quite desperate. She'd had some minor shoplifting charges against her. She was also taking Valium, and it's also known that she'd had ear and bladder infections around the time, which also suggests perhaps she was under considerable stress. She'd also begun to sell her personal items. She'd sold a freezer and had inquired with a friend about possibly purchasing her sewing machine because she had her mother's. She'd also considered selling her car and was seen by several witnesses crying. Marion's desperate situation might actually put her more at risk to cons or ruses from other people who know her. So somebody's psychological or emotional state is very important because it tells you the kinds of things that they might open themselves up for.
It also appears that Mike Sneller and Marion Granville may have been operating independently.
She was involved in minor drug dealing in her own right. That wasn't commonly known. Certainly she went to some pains to ensure that I think her husband wasn't aware of that fact.
Marion's drug dealing only came to light as police began working their way through known drug offenders as part of the investigation into her disappearance. One described her arranging a heroin and marijuana deal, but wanting him to keep it quiet. Another informant said she was pushing heroin and might have had a bit of a habit. It's possible she may have only been dealing for a few short weeks because other contacts weren't aware of it.
No, she was certainly not a drug-dependent person, so far as we were concerned. She was a loving mother to her children, and I think she was in a situation that she was just unable to extricate herself from.
At the time of Marion Granville's disappearance, Mike Sneller was awaiting sentencing stemming from a raid on their Wilkie Crescent home in February 1980. Both Marion and Mike were charged with possession of cannabis for supply. Mike was also charged with possession of a pistol.
She said that a firearm had been found at her place and she didn't know how it had got there.
The firearm was found. Of course, we had the armed hold-up in the bank in Nainai that we were still actively investigating and had suspected that particular group of. A handgun was involved.
The finding of the gun presented a new lead in the Granville case. Police were able to link the gun found at Marion and Mike's home to an armed hold-up in April 1978.
A silver handgun with a 6-inch barrel is the robber's trademark.
And a new name was brought into the investigation. According to Norm Cook's 1980 report into Marion's disappearance, they believed the robber to be one of New Zealand's most notorious bank robbers, who we can't name for legal reasons, along with Mike Sneller and Marion Granville. They also believed Mike and Marion had recently fallen out with their associate. The robbery and its fallout was included in the police report into Marion's disappearance. It was described as a bizarre aspect, although worthy of investigation, has not been seriously considered as a theory for Granville's disappearance.
It was awful, absolutely awful, because he was my friend, obviously caught up in something, and there was nothing that I or my husband could do. We had tried on a couple of occasions to get her to come and live with us. She did say that she did not want to get me caught up in any of the friendships that she's got. I left that meeting and I was just crying. I just felt lost.
Despite the apparent abduction, Marion was considered stressed and possibly on drugs, and with the added anticipation of losing her children, suicide was also seen as a possibility.
I do not believe this was a suicide for a variety of reasons. She made no future plans for her children. She made no will, no provisions for their care. She'd also made plans with a number of friends to see them in the future, and she hadn't given away any of her possessions. In fact, those things she did get rid of, she sold to pay past debts. Also, the biggest consideration I have for why I don't think this could be a suicide is, where's the body? People don't kill themselves and walk off into scrubland.
As the police investigation into Marion Granville's disappearance progressed, it became increasingly unlikely Marion had committed suicide. Absconding of her own volition, perhaps to escape trial, also appeared to be an unlikely scenario for a mother as devoted as Marion. People within the scene were not talking, but there was suspicion several knew what had happened. Soon after Marion disappeared, her mother Vera had a strange meeting with some of Marion's friends.
I got the strong feeling that they treated me as the bereaved. In fact, they had made up their mind that Marion was dead. I got that strong feeling because, you know, they were very sorry. They were sort of hovering around like you do when somebody has lost somebody, and sort of trying to console somebody. And I was just taken aback because at that stage I never thought that she could be dead.
Given Marion's lifestyle risk being in the high category and the circumstances under which she's gone missing, I would have to say that I'm putting my money more towards her perhaps being the victim of homicide. There are a variety of motives for, somebody to stage a particular abduction like this. The first one, I guess, would be that she owed somebody a large amount of money, and that was perhaps taken away in an attempt to get her to pay up.
2 hours after Marion was last seen at the dairy, she made a phone call to a friend. Our investigators believe she may have been attempting to sell her car in order to raise cash. Her friend wasn't home, but his wife took a message. She said Marion sounded agitated and distressed and needed to talk to her husband within half an hour. The message wasn't received until the following day. Another possible motive was the suspicion by some in the criminal underworld that Marion was a police informant. This was based on the fact a drug run from Palmerston North to the Hutt Valley had been intercepted by the police. Very few people knew the timing of this run, and with her court case pending, suspicion was aroused that Marion may have struck a deal.
That information would be seen to be, would be viewed very negatively in terms of Marion's association with the group.
We're able to reveal for the first time that Marion had indeed been targeted by police as a possible informant, but for information completely unrelated to the drug run.
An offer to relocate her overseas was certainly made to her, and it related to an armed hold-up some months earlier. It wasn't a lifestyle of her choice, I'm quite sure. And given the opportunity to get out, so long as the children were with her, in an environment of safety, I think there was always a potential that she would, in fact, extricate herself. And that was the area that we were effectively exploring.
If Marion had told somebody she'd been approached to be a police informant, not only would she put herself at an increased risk, but she'd also put the person she told at an increased risk. Now, they can do one of two things. They can, I guess, sit on the information and perhaps give you their opinion about it, or they can pass it on and try to, I guess, wash their hands of the knowledge and make it look like that, for all intents and purposes, they were doing the right thing.
I suspect that she had confided in her husband, and possibly her husband had confided in someone else. I believe she effectively sealed her own fate because of that.
Wayne Petherick agrees being a police informant or narc is a powerful motive for murder in the criminal underworld. Being a young mother of 3 children would not have elicited much sympathy.
The possibility that somebody has factored in that she's a single mother of 3 young children probably wouldn't have even been on their radar. These kinds of things, if they are actually organised hits, they are organised murders, they tend to be treated very coldly and very clinically. I mean, it's the stereotypical 2 bullet wounds to the back of the head, left in a shallow grave somewhere.
It may not have mattered that Marion had turned down the police offer.
We were left quite clearly with the impression that she wasn't going to buy into the offer.
Marion Granville disappeared in August 1980, a time of exceptional pressure in the criminal fraternity as police worldwide rounded up members of the Mr. Asia syndicate, a time no one wanted to be known as a narc. Norm Cook believes the police informant offer is the key to Marion's disappearance. We've approached her de facto husband, Mike Sneller, for an interview to verify elements of this story.
Mike's an interesting personality, to say the least. He would have a very good idea of the circumstances of Marion's disappearance, I'm quite sure. Even though he wasn't there at the time, he would know by now the circumstances under which he disappeared. That's not information which he has imparted to police.
In 1983, just 3 years after Marion disappeared, Michael Sneller was convicted of the murder of Robert Cansian.
Wait there.
This type of attack is very uncommon, very rare, unique in New Zealand. And so this particular robbery, therefore, will have an unusual motive.
The police confirm that it could have been a vendetta. It definitely was a deliberate act. The robbers sought Mr. Cansian out and beat him up deliberately.
Good evening, Mr. McLean.
Good evening.
What's been Mr. Sneller's reaction to...
While Mike declined our request to comment on Robert Cansian's death or Marion Granville's disappearance, he has previously outlined what he believed happened to Marion, as his lawyer Barry McLean explained in an interview on Holmes.
Now. Of course, he's known that she's been murdered for most of that time, really. There could be no other possible explanation for her disappearance because she was a good and loving mother. But unfortunately, the authorities haven't been able to be convinced of her death. So officially, she's just a missing person.
Now, Michael Sneller's in prison for the murder of Robert Cansian. There was a suggestion that that was somehow linked to Miss Granville's murder as a retribution.
I've got no comment because I've had no instructions. I didn't act, I might say, for Mr. Sneller on those...
Finally, Mr. Sneller's thoughts on what did happen to Marion.
He's set out in an affidavit to the High Court in Wellington through a process which he's been trying to have the coroner declare Marion Granville dead. He set that out in that affidavit, what he believes happened to her, but I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to disclose that to the population at large.
We made an application to the High Court to have the affidavit released.
Wait there. Okay.
And this is the first time information within that affidavit has been made public.
So how was your relationship with Marion?
Oh, it was great. She wrote me a letter a few days before she disappeared.
Sneller denies involvement in Marion's disappearance, but he does talk about an associate believed to be one of this country's most notorious criminals.
I knew him to be a particularly violent, unpredictable, somewhat dangerous character, even by my own standards.
In 1978, police believe that Sneller's associate masterminded a bank robbery in Nainai. Although no charges were ever laid, rumours suggest his accomplices were Mike Sneller and Marion Granville, standing in at the last minute as the getaway driver.
I think it was about March 1980, and I fell out.
In his affidavit, Sneller doesn't mention the robbery, but he does talk about a falling out between him and his associate, which led to threats against him.
Yeah, he made some threats against me. And threats? Not to be taken lightly. I guess when he couldn't get back at me, because I was in jail, he may have decided to take his vengeance out on Marion. It had arranged and was probably involved in her abduction. I think he murdered her.
The fact that one individual stood out as a potential suspect was run to ground in every way that we could possibly do at the time. There was just no evidence available to in fact proceed further.
For 12 years, Marion Granville was simply a missing person. Then, in 1992, the coroner declared her dead. Cause of death, misadventure in a manner unknown, on or about August 30th, 1980. There was another event on the day of Marion's disappearance that has always remained a mystery.
The circumstances under which her vehicle found its way back to her address has never been adequately explained. In fact, I don't think we identified the person who actually did that.
By eyewitness accounts, there was once, possibly twice during the day that people went back, and the first time it does appear that they spent a good 15 to 20 minutes in her house. Now, given that their appearance was described as similar to the people she'd been seen outside the dairy with, and given that they spent so long there, that would perhaps fit most or best with the scenario that they were in fact looking for something.
Certainly one person knows the circumstances under which he disappeared. I suspect a number of people know. Any one of them could tell us at any one time, and I'm sure the police are quite happy to wait until those people or person has a twinge of conscience. Marion deserved something better. She wasn't a criminal of their ilk, if you like. She was there because of the kids and her desire to, in fact, provide something for them. She had got herself ensconced in an area that she just couldn't escape from, and that's the tragedy of the matter.
Even if she might have disappeared for a short while because of something that had happened in her life, she would not have disappeared so long. And so I believe now that she is dead. So.